Is Mikel Lejean. I'm here with my network hat, and I'll introduce myself shortly. But before we start, we do have interpretation available, so I just want to make sure to hand it over to our interpreters before kicking off the introduction. Megan, whenever you're ready.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Megan Morrissey, estoy con mi co-intérprete María Sigourney y estaremos ofreciendo la interpretación simultánea entre inglés y español. Estamos practicando la justicia del lenguaje, así que si eres bilingüe no tienes que hacer nada, pero si prefieres escuchar y participar plenamente en español, vas a hacer lo siguiente. Si estás en una computadora, haz clic en el icono del globo terráqueo que está en la parte inferior de tu pantalla y seleccione español. Y no hay que silenciar el audio original. Si no ves el globito, haz clic en los tres puntitos donde dice más a la extrema derecha del menú de Zoom y presiona Interpretación, luego Español y Finalizado para que se guarden sus preferencias. Cualquier problema con la interpretación, háganoslo saber en el chat, por favor. So this is Megan Morrissey. I'm here with my co-interpreter Maria Sigourney, and we will be providing simultaneous interpretation between English and Spanish. If you're bilingual, you don't need to do anything, but if you want to listen and participate fully in English during the session, here's what you should do. If you joined on a computer, click the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose English. And you don't need to mute the original audio. If you're on a cell phone or if your Zoom window is quite small, you'll have to go to the menu, the three dots at the far right of the menu where it says More, click Language Interpretation, and then English, and then Done. And let us know if you need any help with the interpretation function. Please let us know in the chat. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Megan. Thank you. And Megan will also post that in the chat just to make sure folks have access to the instructions should they need it at any point throughout. Hello, everyone. My name is Mikel Lejean. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight, morning, evening, whatever is most appropriate for wherever you're joining us from. We've got an awesome um, list of participants from all over the globe, which is a really happy thing as an organizer to see. Um, like I said, my name is Mikkel. I'm an movement organizer and independent consultant. But tonight I'm wearing one of my favorite hats, which is one of the steering committee members of the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex. I'm joined by my fellow steering committee members, Claire, Issa, Nate, and David. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. We've got a really exciting and incredible set of panelists for this topic. For logistics, we're going to be using a Q&A function. So make sure to use that Q&A function throughout as questions pop up during presentations. If you do put questions in the chat function, we'll do our best to adhere to, spotlighting it, but it may get lost in the shuffle. So Q&A is the best way to put forward any questions you want answered. And we'll also have any follow-up for questions that we aren't able to answer if a panelist has to leave or drop off. So for folks that don't know, the network is a diverse movement to challenge the systems and the structures that sustain war, militarism, and global violence. We are comprised of individuals, organizations, and communities that are committed to challenging and undermining the power and influence of the military-industrial complex. We work to weaken and ultimately um, dismantle a system that relies on perpetual conflict, exploitation of resources, and the marginalization of voices that wish to uphold peace through justice in a world where military interests have come to dominate United States public policy, economics, and international relationships. We strive to redefine security by investing in systems that truly make us safe, such as education, healthcare, affordable housing, climate resilience, and restorative justice. We are trying to do this through grassroots organizing, political advocacy, education, narrative, and coalition building. And we're creating pathways towards demilitarization and lasting peace with justice. The work of dismantling the military industrial complex is complex and urgent, but together we believe in more just and peaceful ways in which this world can come together. and it's only possible through that work. So I did want to make one disclaimer, which is that tonight's title, Stopping Trump's War Machine, is an entry point into this much larger and deeper struggle. While Trump represents the worst of the system come home to roost, he is also merely a symptom of what has been built in a bipartisan way and unchecked for decades. We aren't here to focus on Trump, but the system at large. And please excuse our use of catchy titles for the more deeper and nuanced conversation we're trying to bring forward tonight. Um, and this is definitely something that goes beyond just one person or administration. Uh, as we're kind of setting the scene for the moment in time, there's already the ongoing war in Ukraine, the Israeli military's war on Gaza and its people, the broader push for greater Israel, the increasing violence and horrors in Sudan and Congo, and the interest of many governments scrambling for resources and pushing military imposition. And as we watch this rapidly escalating presence of the US in the Southern Caribbean, we also recognize that the intersecting ways in which resource extraction, militarism, and climate change are threatening our brothers and sisters in the Pacific Islands under colonial occupation as one marker of what is happening all over the globe. Safe to say, there is no better time for our movement to collectively expose, confront, and counter this crucial moment in time. And with that, I'm going to close the introduction and pass it over to my colleague, Meg.
Thanks, Mikhail. Day, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you all today, and I have the honor of introducing our amazing panel. And first, we have Julian Aguon. Julian Aguon is an Indigenous human rights lawyer and acclaimed writer from Guam, who won the 2025 Right Livelihood Award for securing a 2025 International Court of Justice advisory opinion declaring states having binding obligations to address climate change. Julian is the founder of Blue Ocean Law and is on the Global Advisory Council of Progressive International. Next up, we have Brittany DeBarros. Brittany is the organizing director of the path-breaking veterans organization About Face Veterans Against the War. Brittany is a former Army captain, combat veteran, activist, and previously ran for Congress in New York's 11th District. And last but certainly not least, we have William D. Hartung. Bill is a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and co-author of the new book, The $1 Trillion War Machine: How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars and Bankrupts Us at Home. Bill is also author of Prophets of War, Lockheed Martin and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex. Regretfully, Bill needs to leave a little early today, so if you have any questions or comments for Bill during the Q&A, we will make sure he receives them, and he's also going to share his email in the chat for folks to directly check in with him, and we hopefully will be able to send also some of his responses in a follow-up. And I hand it back over to our host. Thank you all so much.
I think we can turn things over to you, Bill. Please take it away.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on the panel with Julian and Brittany, who are the front lines of organizing on crucial issues. I think progressive vets are part of the bedrock of our ability to bring change. And I think the militarization of the Pacific is underappreciated by many people here in the States. And it's crucial to understand that, to understand where we are now. I'm glad to be with a group of organizers. I'm mostly a researcher, but I've finally learned at age 70 that my research, without being useful to organizers, is sort of like a peculiar hobby. But I am learning that. And one other thing I've also learned is that it's not enough to just dissect the power structure, give an exquisite explanation of how much influence they have, because you're likely to demobilize people. They're like, oh God, that is a lot. I can't deal with that. So it has to be combined with some sense of hope. And hope comes from talking about our past victories, highlighting current organizing, and telling the stories of courageous people who've stood up against long odds and made a difference. So, being with people who are trying to change the world at a time when we're under siege is very inspiring to me. And it keeps me going, maybe to write more than I should. But you know, one thing that's happened to me, because younger folks think I know stuff, they'll reach out to me about research questions. A lot of them are out of the ceasefire movement. More often than not, they're ahead of me on the issue that they're talking about. There's a guy named Bryce Green at University of Indiana. I met him on a Santita Jackson's radio show, which is very, the people actually get to talk to each other. And he sent me their research on Indiana University for input. It was 16 pages, incredibly detailed, more than I could have figured out because they were there. They were on the ground. And one thing they found was that the university had a relationship to a naval warfare center in southern Indiana that had 3,600 employees. Their professors were cycling through. That center worked on everything from missile defense to counterinsurgency to naval, expansion. So they've now got it's called Crane Naval, Keep Crane Off Campus campaign. I've also spoken to people in the Palestinian youth movement who have figured out how spare parts are getting to Israel to keep their planes running. And some of them are being sent by a FedEx out of the San Francisco airport. There's a researcher, Julian Cooper in Madison, who his first article that he published was about Oshkosh Truck, and they're selling military vehicles to the IDF, actually accelerating sales once the war in Gaza started. And there's many others. There's a researcher who's figuring out U.S. academics who get funding from the Israeli government. So what I've been trying to do is bring those researchers together with older generations who've been doing this for a while. And my experience is I learn more than they do, but I'm hoping that across issues, we can get together once in a while, brainstorm about writing, swap sources. And since I really want it to be anybody who's working on any aspect of militarism, I'm hoping it'll be a small way to bring our parallel movements closer together. So some of that connection is happening already, and is not my doing. But for example, there was a group called NARMIC, National Action Research on the Military Industrial Complex, which came out of the American Friends Service Committee in the Vietnam War period. It was a very crucial source of information. Well, some of the student researchers did a webinar with the founders of NARMIC about how they did their research, comparing ideas, of course. And likewise, my mentor, Michael Clare, who was head of research for Students of Democratic Society at Columbia, some of his old pamphlets have been scanned and linked to in articles by younger researchers. And finally, Little Sis, which is a power research organization, did a webinar with dissenters about how to research war profiteering connections at your university. And it was partly about enabling Israel, but it was also about military research, military connections, and boards of trustees. It was about getting militarism out of our university. So it's kind of a broader and longer term undertaking. So all of that is inspiring to me. And I think if we can create even a loose network, it'll advance the cause. And I've been thinking a lot about how do you integrate research into organizing and strategy. So it's not just a bunch of stats sitting on a piece of paper. And one of my inspirations has been working with the Shelley Barnes at the Poor People's Campaign. Because not only is she an organizer, but she does research and writing. She sort of understands how to deal with people on the front lines who are going to be our leadership and see what they think is useful, kind of create a bigger picture of all of this. And along those lines, Lisbia Harris, who's the co-chair of the campaign, has a book which is, I don't know if that's clear, but it's about the history of poor people's movements. And if you just Google Lisbia Harris books, it'll pop up. But one of the things she talked about was kind of you need both. You need research and education. You need activism. And one thing she said in the book is, without a continual process of learning, reflecting, and growing intellectually, our organizing is reduced to mobilizing, an exercise in moving bodies without supporting existing leaders, developing new ones. Mobilizing people is important, but when it comes to our sole focus, we sacrifice long-term power for short-term action. And she goes on to quote MLK from his essay, Where Do We Go From Here? Education without social action is a one-sided value because it has no true power potential. Social action without education is a weak expression of pure energy. Our policies should have the strength of deep analysis beneath them to be able to challenge the clever sophistries of our opponents. And then she goes on to talk about different strategy or approaches to research and reform by organizers. So she looks at Miles Horton, who ran the Highlander School, which trained a lot of civil rights and labor activists, and Saul Alinsky, who is kind of some people's kind of go-to theorist on organizing. Alinsky felt that you needed victories of even small victories to keep people engaged, inspired, fighting the good fight. Miles Horton said it depends. He would rather work with groups that are looking for structural change than short-term reforms. And if he didn't want to like damp down the message to win those short reforms, if he sacrificed building a more radical, far-seeing movement. So I think, if you deal with Washington, which I've thankfully never moved to, but I'm in those circles, that problem of sacrificing long-term vision to short-term reforms is endemic. I work with some groups that work on nuclear arms control, and one of their demands is don't build a new intercontinental ballistic missile because you can save money if you extend the life of the old ones. In the meantime, they've been telling people correctly, these missiles are probably the most dangerous thing in the nuclear arsenal because in a crisis, the president has a few minutes to decide whether to launch them. And if there's a false alarm, they could have an accidental nuclear war. So whether they're old or new, it doesn't make a difference. And so why you would choose that is because they're guided by what can get through Congress. Aside from a few champions, Congress is bankrupt. That can't be our goal, nor should it be getting the Trump administration to listen to us. So it's really got to come from outside of Washington. And I know this group has done some of the best work about how to communicate, about how to organize. The fact that it's global in scope is crucial because I think, when I was a student, we talked about solidarity with, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the people who've been subjected to the Pinochet regime in Chile. But there was kind of this notion of, well, we're in this great democratic society, we have an obligation to help. Well, that was not the case then, and it's certainly not the case now. I would say we need as much solidarity from the rest of the world as they need from us. And there's people who have been through what we're witnessing now and worse, and we have to learn from how they survived that, how they approached that, and so forth. So I think for me, this 70-year-old white dude sitting in Manhattan, I need to do listening. I need to be a bit humble about my knowledge, my expertise, because there's different kinds of expertise. There's sort of stuff you get on the web, there's statistical analysis, but there's also how to organize, how to communicate, how to operate in different environments. So, in sort of the thought experiment, ideally, our meetings are not, like an academic expert telling folks how the world works. And again, the Poor People's Campaign kind of reminded me of that because Leslie Harris is yet another book. And before we heard any speakers, we sat in groups and swapped experiences, backgrounds, ideas. And there are actually very few speeches. There's more singing than talking, which is actually more fun than a DC webinar. And I think you need a certain amount of joy in the struggle because we don't know how long this is going to take. It helps sustain us, but also I think it makes it more likely people might join us because the issues themselves are grim and bracing. But if you feel like fighting the good fight is sort of putting you in touch with humanity and just making you be able to cope with the world we're in, I think that's helpful. I know in my case, people are always saying, well, Bill, how can you deal with this depressing stuff all the time? Well, the thing is, it's there. People are aware of it consciously or unconsciously. And to think you can just avoid it and, just live with your community, your family, that's not possible anymore because the effects are there, whether you attend to them or not. So I feel actually I would be more depressed if I had given up. I was sitting home, playing video games, which I don't actually know how to do. So I don't think I have a lot more to say, except, I think there's a lot of people sitting on the fence, at least in the US. It's coming at us fast and furious. They say they don't know what to do. And I always say to them, well, you're not going to figure it out by sitting back. You got to organize, you got to join groups. If you're in motion, together we'll figure it out. I did a webinar last night with the War Industry Resistors Network, and one of the questions was, had my co-author and I come up with a strategy in our book for change, of changing all these things. And I said, well, I don't think two white dudes at a think tank are going to be the ones who determine the strategy for a global movement. It's going to be a collective enterprise. People who are on the front lines, we have to take some guidance from them. And so I view myself kind of as trying to create support and give people arguments and information that they can use, and sometimes connect people maybe who I've met who aren't should be connected and working together, and encouraging some of the younger researchers that when I was a student, after we didn't win for a few years, a lot of people dropped out. But this is really should be a lifelong commitment, and I'm trying to communicate that to people. Also, for folks who can't get jobs at DC NGOs doing this stuff, no revolution has come from DC think tanks. It's people integrating this stuff into their everyday life. So, I'm encouraging some of the folks who have sort of lost that position to keep writing, to keep working at whatever level they're able, and also to understand that to overturn what we're dealing with, people are going to have to take greater risks than they have in the past, because elections are difficult. They're not following the court decisions. So people are going to have to, break down the gears however they can. Civil disobedience, not participating in illegal orders, all that's in play. And, different people, I think, can afford to take different levels of risk, but we have to understand we're in a different moment. And there's plenty of examples of people all over the world who've done that. And so I think we need to learn from those. And I think the only last thing I'll say is Willie Baptiste, who is a mentor of Liz Theoharis, has this saying, the struggle is the school. It's not about standing back and analyzing it. It's about working together with people who have the experiences up front, people who are maybe looking at an overview and integrating the two when we figure out our strategy. So, those are my thoughts. And I thank you very much for having me. And I don't know, we may just go to the next speaker or not, but there'll be questions that I will receive and answer. So.
All right, I'm pinned. I'm guessing that means we're going straight to me to answer your question, Bill. Thank you for everything that you shared. Um, my name is Brittany. I am the organizing director for About Face Veterans Against the War. I have been a member of About Face since 2017, and I joined when I was still in the Army. I joined as a person who joined the military as a true believer. Like, I truly believed that when I deployed, I was going to go fight for democracy and freedom and save innocent people from the bad guys. And it was a devastating way to realize that I was misguided, in that to find myself occupying someone else's country and realize that I was on the wrong side of justice and of history in participating in that unjust violence. And so About Face completely changed my life. It is the organization that showed me the kind of transformation that community makes possible, that transformative organizing makes possible, and what it means to inspire people about their own power where they're situated, right? I spent years from the time that I came back from Afghanistan being angry, devastated, traumatized, etc., about what I had witnessed and what I had participated in myself, with no framework to make sense of that or to do anything with it. And the stories I told myself were that there was nothing I could do, right? That I was part of this machine. I was trapped in it because they had paid for my college and I couldn't get out without paying back $500,000 that I didn't have. And I found myself realizing that all it took was a little spark of recognition that, in watching the documentary Sir No Sir, my whole life changed in the moment that I will always remember sitting on that couch watching that documentary and realizing, what have I been doing this whole time? I have a choice. There's this powerful legacy of active military people risking everything to stand up in situations where it seemed like nothing else was possible. And I've been telling myself there's nothing I can do. And that was all it took to ignite my own belief in my own agency, a willingness to take risk, right? And to do so in accountability and community with a broader movement of people. And so I say all of that to say, because I think one, I want you to understand the context I'm working for. You know, if I'm going to share my ideas about what do we need to do in this moment, one, you know, kind of what's the perspective I'm coming from, and two, that is still the work that I'm carrying forward. And I fundamentally believe that, you know, I believe that we have immense power at our fingertips right now to transform our own conditions. And that we're in a moment where neoliberalism, which has held a vice grip in controlling our government for the last decades, is losing ground. And that there's a real shift in the way that American imperialism is being executed and contested for in this moment. And I think it's really important that we all like recognize that shift that's happening in order to make sense what this moment demands of us. And it's also to say that like I don't think any of us have the answers, because we are in this inflection point, right? Like I think we are having to feel our way through this moment with as much grounded assessment as we can, and the best conjectures we can come up with based on what we learned from history and our ideas about what's possible. And so I am going to put forward some pretty like clear opinions about what I think should happen, but I want you to know that they're held with a lot of humility, and that I'm saying them this forcefully because they're an invitation that if you disagree, that's an opportunity for provocation that helps us all sharpen our thinking about what's possible in this moment, right? So I just wanted to give that context. I am operating with an understanding of our conditions, which is that we're seeing the kind of like desperate grasping decline of neoliberal control of our government in this country. And we're seeing the rise of an ideological fascist movement that has been able to capture governing power. Meaning, right, certain seats, enough power within our governing system to start changing the table, right? To change the rules of the game, to reorganize the kind of goalposts and the norms, but they have not consolidated to seize control of the state. There's still meaningful fractures that they're trying to overcome in order to consolidate that kind of like very broad, diverse right-wing set of movements that they're trying to move forward. And that we have as people, if I say we, the people's movements, what I think many of us, if we're here, we probably think of ourselves as left in some way. I'm very clear that we have two distinct enemies, and maybe more, but we'll say two for the sake of simplicity in this moment. And that is this kind of authoritarian front that is working to consolidate itself so that it can move from governing power into state capture and state control, right? To consolidate their full ability to control the state in an uncontested way. And that their main enemy are the neoliberal forces who they've had to wrestle power away from, but the neoliberal forces are also our enemy, right? And so we have these two, I'm clear, right? Both of them are the enemy of the people. And that we live in a movement moment where there has been a tendency to lump together, because we have these two enemies that are both very distinctly enemies, together into this like unnuanced mush of all our enemies versus us. And that positions us in a very disempowering way of relating to the power dynamics of this moment. And so that's one assumption that I'm operating with around how I understand how I'm making sense of the conditions that we're in. And because of that, it asks this question that I think we have to grapple with, which is, what would it take in the conditions that we're looking at to advance control, right? To move towards a reality where the people, our people's movements, control the governing system. Now that is a complicated and sometimes controversial question in leftist spaces in and of itself, right? Like then we're going to debate the idea of like, should that even be the goal? The reason I'm asserting that that's the goal is because as anti-imperialists, there is no way for us to sidestep our responsibility to contest with the state. Because there is no amount of market disruption that we could do to undermine imperialism, because the market forces will just shift shapes, right? Like the market forces for imperialism will always be there, and there's no way to check them without meaningful governing power for a sustained period of time, right? Even if our goal is anarchy, even if our goal is even if our goal is social democracy, right? Like wherever you fall on that spectrum, there's no way for us to avoid that in order to move away from an imperialist reality of US imperialism, we have to deal with the state at some point, right? Because otherwise, what imperialists, as we all know, have been able to do is weaponize the state to protect the market interests, even when they're contested on the market side, right? Even when we're able to disrupt at the level of capital and business, right? And I think that this is a truth that we don't like to confront. I think that that is a really depressing truth, right? Like I take no joy in confronting like there are going to be many things I say in the next 10 minutes that are like, yeah, it sucks that we're in this position. And I wish that wasn't the position that we're in. And yet I come from a place of like, I am so determined to win for our people and our earth that we have a responsibility to confront the shitty position that we're in a realistic and sober way that allows us to make real strides towards changing that, right? And I think in order to do that, we have to be willing to confront this idea that there's no sidestepping dealing with the state. And so if there's no sidestepping dealing with the state, then what is our strategy to wrestle away control of the state from both the fascists and the neoliberals? Typically, that is not something that has been a central topic of conversation in anti-war movement spaces that I've been a part of. And I think that that's a missed opportunity that we can no longer afford in these conditions. And I think when we look at the conditions this way, there's a tendency to say, well, I think one of the reasons we avoid these conversations is because the reality is if we're trying to stop the fascists from consolidating from governing power to state control, then that might mean we have to work within liberal institutions and with a liberal popular front in order to do that. And that is gross and devastating and frustrating, right? It is. It just is. And we, unfortunately, are not positioned in a position where we can build the infrastructure necessary to capture state power away from either of these enemies of ours without engaging with the structures that are rigged against us right now, right? Just like to get into the nuts and bolts of it, literally these two corporate parties, right? One of which I would contend suffered a coup by a fascist movement that took it over, meaning the Republican Party, right? And then our kind of like normal neoliberal Democratic Party. They have been able to rig the electoral system in such a way that is impossible for us to meaningfully capture any governing power, let alone state power, like at scale, without working within one of those two party systems for the most part, right? I'm not saying that there aren't like small promising exceptions that we should be like looking at as case studies that we could build on. But the reality is that like, even when we get people's champions elected, for example, just as one, I'm not saying that this is all about electoralism, right? But just as one example of this, like we ultimately have to often do that on a Democratic line and maybe another line, right? Or maybe by drawing a distinction between the type of person running on the Democratic line it is. And so like there are wins that we have to make to win to like what I think of as loosening the bolts of the machine in order to be able to dismantle the machine. And I think that that's something we have to contend with. I want to pause because I'm seeing a note from David and I'm wondering if yes, I'm almost at time. I thought I might be. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up my last kind of, I want to bring it like down to earth because these are all big picture things I'm saying. So my last couple lines before I wrap up are, I think that these things speak to our protest movements in these conditions. If we're serious that we have to confront the kind of prevent the consolidation of this fascist movement towards state control, because that will change the conditions in such a way where we might be locked into a shitty position for a much longer period of time. Is that we have to be, every protest action that we do has to be moving towards capacity for mass non-cooperation. Every single one. We cannot keep doing protests that are trying to win like specific siloed wins without a connection towards how we understand that protest is going to be building capacity towards mass non-cooperation, because it will take mass non-cooperation when we end up in red line situations, right? Or we have an auto coup situation, for example, where a president is like, I'm not leaving, or undermines an election so aggressively that it's not legitimate. The other thing is that I think everything has to tie back to a unified anti-authoritarian front. One example I'll give of this is they're beating the drums of war with Venezuela. There's a temptation amongst some, I've noticed in our sector, to be like, we need a new anti-war movement to stop the war with Venezuela. I disagree. I think that we need to embed ourselves in anti-authoritarian cross-sector spaces to pull in analysis about Venezuela and to connect it back to the anti-authoritarian movement that is already gaining traction, right? And so that would look like, instead of being like, it's all about the oil, I'm not saying don't say that, but I'm just giving an example, right? Being like, Trump is picking a fight with Venezuela because he's losing his domestic agenda domestically, and he needs to activate the national security apparatus in order to advance his fascist agenda, right? We're still talking about the war with Venezuela, the fact that it's not a legitimate reason that they're claiming that they're doing this, all of that. But now we're tying it back to the centralized kind of class-based and anti-authoritarian movement, rather than creating these splinters that could then divide the kind of united front that we need in this moment. So there's so much more I wish I could say, but I know I'm over time. I want to stop there, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss more together during Q&A.
I guess it's my turn. Thank you, Brittany. I like you a lot. That was awesome. I just appreciate the clarity of thought. For me, I feel like my entry point into this conversation, I just want to be really clear about it. Like, I had this sort of fanciful notion of preparing for this webinar, and then life happened. And when I say that, I mean life on Guam, how we actually live it here, happened. What I mean is, for the last 72 hours, all we have done, me and my entire team at my law firm, is work around the clock to finalize a comment in response to a current US attempt to engage or to instigate a process of deep sea mining in the waters off the coast of both the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and Guam, all of our islands. And this, mind you, is on top of every other comment that our communities, our indigenous peoples of both Guam and Sinai, have had to comment. We have spent this entirety almost of this year and the past 6 years responding, lurching from one crisis to another, commenting, reading voluminous documents. And when I say voluminous, I mean we're talking in the 90,000 page level. This is it's thousands of pages cumulatively of federal, highly specialized technical documents that we're responding to. And what are those documents? It's basically every single attempt by the United States military to militarize everything in our islands on land and at sea. So this deep sea mining attempt, and that's why I couldn't prepare anything for this talk, which I think is a perfect entry point, because that gives you sort of a sense, a palpable sense of the kind of sort of real oppressive, urgent, like kind of ceaseless experience of our lives for coming on a decade. My people spend all of our time responding and trying so hard to sort of mitigate the sort of harms, the manifold harms that the US military industrial complex is having on our island right now. So the deep sea mining is one thing. It's clearly going to have a wide range of deleterious impacts on all of the benthic environment, on all marine mammals. And that's just deep sea mining. There's also US military activities that we also had to respond to, and those activities were basically going to threaten tens of thousands of marine mammals, all manner of dolphins and whales, all of our other than human relatives. And on land, the same is happening. The US military has spent the last several years bulldozing thousands of acres of pristine limestone forests. We have fought them on every front. We, as a law firm, this is just our particular role. We have basically thrown lawsuits at the U.S. military every step of the way under every conceivable federal environmental statute, from the National Environmental Policy Act to the Endangered Species Act to the Administrative Procedures Act. This is just our life. It's a ridiculously oppressive process. And that is why we can't even address the bigger monstrous problem that we are having, which is we haven't even been able to throw off the colonial yoke. Guam is a formally recognized non-self-governing territory, i.e., UN recognized colony. We are slated for a formal act of decolonization whereby we will get to, in theory, choose to emerge as an independent nation on our own terms. And all of that is happening. So now you have the most aggressive, unilateral, sort of military buildup in modern history sitting right on top of 500 years of uninterrupted colonization. And that is what we're up against in the islands. And that is why, like, it's ridiculously annoying to be like, I mean, I will just be frank. I'm happy that I basically said yes to this webinar. I wanted to meet everyone here and talk to everyone and be part of this conversation that's really urgent and necessary in every possible way. But at the same time, this is it's too much. It's all too much. And I think that is not anomalous. It's the point, I mean, the US military industrial complex is the air we breathe. It is like our meat and drink. I don't know how else to really capture that, but basically it controls our daily life. I mean, it's theoretically the holiday season, and that's all we can do is try to stay this or arrest the spreading canopy of US militarization. But that is not a life, that is not a life. And that is what we are up against. And I think the reason why I say no to like 99% of all webinars now at this point, and I know that's bad on my part as an organizer, but I can barely breathe because that is something that the American, like even anti-war community, civil society movements, I mean, I have worked with so many of them, cannot understand. There is a glaring lack of appreciation for our context here in the Pacific and in the Mariana Islands, to include Guam and the Sinai in particular. We are like under siege in a total, thorough, comprehensive, and cataclysmic way. And that is why we get so frustrated and that's sort of the central idea I want to bring to the conversation. And I hope that's okay and that it's received in the spirit in which it's given, that's my central critique. It's that we have failed as even an anti-war movement to look to the bottom. We have failed at radical listening. And by radical listening, I mean listening to the voices of those who are the most oppressed, the most vulnerable. And that is exactly what our communities here in the Marianas are. We are acutely vulnerable to all of sort of the ingenious machinations of the American empire and the American imperial imagination. I mean, you should see, I mean, I'll just give you an even more exceedingly concrete example. There is a 360-degree missile defense system that the US military is proposing to build. Of course, it's unprecedented, untested, never been done, and at the same time, although every single National Defense Authorization Act, every single budget bill and supplemental budget bill, and we know, right, that has just topped $1 trillion. I think it was George Monbiot who actually said, you don't judge a country really. Its real constitutive document is not the Constitution, it's the budget. That's how you judge sort of the commitments of a country and the values of a country. And that really is instructive in this case, because the US is a country that just is going to, because unless we can stop it, engage in sort of endless warmongering. That has always been true. And if we don't get better at a movement, it will continue to be true. And it's going to have very exceedingly concrete impacts on my people and the people of the Marianas. But that setting that aside, we as a community have raised the alarm, we've rung the bell on one tiny, minuscule aspect of this 360-degree missile defense system. The fact that there are no money, there is no funds, and there's never been funds for bomb shelters. It is a joke. Like, we have been told, basically, by the federal government and its sort of local counterparts, i.e. like Guam Homeland Security, that basically we should shelter in place. And this goes, and it's every time. Like in 2017, I will also try to wrap up soon. In 2017, when North Korea was threatening Guam with ballistic missiles that are said to be capable of reaching the island within 14 minutes, we were actually told, there was like a freaking flyer that came out, and we were told that we basically, for those of us who are unfortunate enough to find ourselves outdoors when such a ballistic missile reaches the island, we should do things like not only shelter in place, but also if we're caught outside, we should definitely shampoo our hair, but not condition our hair, because radioactive material has a tendency to stick by way of that conditioner. I only bring this, one, it's true. Two, I don't know what an Indigenous pulverized community is supposed to do at this point with such spectacularly useless suggestions. And that is exactly what we're up against, and exactly the kind of thing and the kind of urgency that we are always trying to smuggle into the national anti-war movement and conversation. And I swear to God, we have been at this for 20 years almost. Like, I have actively participated in this movement for 18 of those years, and it has not happened. Our stories are not made center. The margin is never brought to the center. We have conversations about this, and it's a nominal, theoretical, almost speculative exercise, but it's not real, and nothing has changed. And that is something that is more frustrating than I can possibly convey with words. I can't even find the language to describe the sort of rage that I have with that. So that is the gist of sort of what I want to contribute. In part it's a plea, but it's in part like a frustration that's been earned over all of these years. And I believe, like, if the American left and the anti-war movement cannot accommodate this sort of thing that we're asking, and that is to sort of realize that the America's war of aggressions, especially now pointed most squarely at China, it is impacting this particular geopolitical theater with sort of unmatched urgency. And but somehow we can't recalibrate the national conversation around that recognition. That is problematic to me. That is the gist, sort of what I want to contribute. I hope you can receive it again in the spirit in which I offer it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. I want to say that 150% not just received in the spirit, but thank you. Like, thank you for being here and making that time and for that offer and saying what you shouldn't have to keep saying over and over again. And also, yeah, thank you. And we're going to turn to taking a few minutes for questions because we have been gifted with a lot of brilliance over this last half hour. And deep appreciation to you as well, Brittany, and to Bill, who had to leave, but we will capture for him any questions that folks also wanted to bring to him. But just to take a breath together and take in what we've heard from Bill, talking about how it's not enough to dissect the power structure. We have to find our courage and get into organizations and formations. Brittany talking to us about how we need to be rigorously realistic about what is needed to meet this moment and the mass non-cooperation that it's going to take to break the holds of fascist consolidation. And what does it mean to get some wins to loosen the bolts of the machine that needs to be dismantled? And Julian sharing just the tip of the iceberg around that immediacy, the immediacy and the urgency of being at a front line of pushing back on so many facets of colonization and destruction from the US military. And that we have to be also rigorously real about this, the ways that the US anti-war movement continually falls short in centering the leadership and the stories and the visions of the people who are most directly dealing with that violence. And while folks drop either into the chat or the Q&A your questions, since you haven't done that yet, I want to ask Brittany and Julian, can you tell us more about what does direct support look like for the work you are organizing? Julian, how do we flank you more effectively while you're under siege like this? Brittany, how can people support About Face's work and the Right to Refuse campaign? Whichever of you would like to jump in first.
Julian, I want to let you go first if you want, but I don't want to put you on the spot either. Okay. Oh, are you going? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's panelist chicken. All right. I think from our perspective, I think we've been having a lot of I'm grateful that About Face was able to get to the place where we were like having a lot of these assessment conversations about like what do we actually think is needed of us in this moment. And we were able to get really specific and focused that like there's so much that needs to get done, but we feel like our lane is particularly intervening around preventing the authoritarian front from consolidating the military behind their movement and military communities, right? So our kind of mission, for lack of better terms, that we're really focused on in the short run is that everything that we do is about trying to like deepen the fractures against authoritarianism across military communities. So that's vets, military families, and active military. We are one of the only, we're one of the, I'll say one of the only left organizations that is military facing. Um, there's a tendency, I think, there's like this huge like pro-democracy front that's like a very broad mix of types of organizations. I'm glad it exists. And also I'm constantly grappling with this question of like, how do we contend with this, right? Because I think that just straight up like we're not on the radar, and the history of like the anti-imperialist movement and imperialism generally is like not on the radar of a lot of the kind of core drivers of that sector. But I think that that sector is positioned to lead in important ways right now, right? And to kind of like be a site of consolidation. The question is the left going to lead into those spaces and lead within that front, right? Or is the left kind of going to get dragged along by liberal forces who end up controlling that front? Right. And I don't think that that's how we think about it a lot of the times. I think we're often like, they suck, so we're over here. And that's what I mean a little bit about like getting down and dirty. You know, I'm just like, I think we need to get a little bit more of like that they suck, so we need to be there and we need to be organized there, right? We need to be consolidated. We need to have like a wing of that pro-democracy front, right? That is like pushing a particular anti-imperialist lens. So all of that to say, like, I feel like one is that about like just you helping to uplift the work of About Face and the fact that About Face exists, but also just this anti-imperialist tradition, including military resistance as a key part of that tradition is like step one, right? Is because I'm like, we're doing this work. We're like we're successful. I've talked to over 100 active military members in the last like several months. Like we're doing it, right? And like and it's just like we're so tiny compared to the scale of the opportunity. So the second thing is just like figuring out how we can build a broader coalition of people who are invested in the military resistance line of effort, right? Like not everybody that needs to be your bread and butter to be thinking about how do we connect to that part of the strategy? Because that strategy isn't just to advance some kind of organizational goal. That strategy is on behalf of a broader left anti-authoritarian strategy. So I think having more organizations who are thinking about like, hey, like in Guam, there's a massively high rate of military enlistment, right? And we know that that's for colonial reasons. The same thing's true in indigenous communities on Turtle Island and in Puerto Rico, my homeland, right? Like all these other places. And that's because of a bunch of exploitative reasons. But like, what's the opportunity right now for us to join together, right? Those like indigenous struggles with the lattice work of military networks to be connecting people to resources around their right to refuse in this time, right? And thinking about what are your options and choices and how do you want to move in this moment as a person in the military? How do you help us get in touch with military communities that are in your community, right? And we can take a lot of the work from there, right? But it's like we can't actually do that broad network effect without flanking partners. So that's the second thing that really comes to mind. And the third is just like being with us and like understanding that like speaking to, I don't know, differentiating, like sometimes it's complicated because I'm straddling both sides where I'm like, okay, please, yes, we're trying to organize the National Guard. We're also not trying to be weird apologists that are like, you're not allowed to be mad that the National Guard is occupying your neighborhood with guns, right? Like, yeah, actually, if you want to protest that and be mad about that, go for it. We're trying to organize them. And we have a strategy where we think pushing them together with ICE is actually really unstrategic, right? Because right now, National Guard people are like, oh, I don't want to be lumped in with ICE. That's a different thing. I signed up to help with floods or whatever, right? Like, I'm not trying to be them. But if we position them if we lump them together, then we're potentially pushing them into solidarity with ICE in a way that is counterproductive to our goals. So just thinking about like when you have these frontline fights that are happening around particularly ICE raids and military occupation, like use us as a resource. We're here for it to like help think about, hey, how can we flank you in that, and like organizing the National Guard and also hosting trainings and things like that that can help people think through how do you talk to your friend or family member in the National Guard who might be getting mobilized around this. And how do you think about relating to the National Guard without watering down your resistance tactics? Because that's certainly not the goal.
I completely agree with all of that. And just to be really concrete about some of the things that like our allies, or the ways in which you can flank us as not only Blue Ocean Law, but all of our sort of community-based organizations. Nick Flores, who's on the call, for example, she leads Pertehi Latexan or Pertehi Guahan. And that's an organization that I would say is at the absolute forefront of sort of opposing the military industrial complex on Guam. And they need support. For example, they tried to rally, and they're still rallying all of our potential allies and partners to submit comments in opposition to the United States' attempt to exploit deep sea minerals off of our waters. So this is something, it's concrete and it's happening right now. I believe there is a rumor that there will be a 30-day extension, and I think that will be announced in the next few hours. We just found out. But if that's true, we have 30 days to sort of rally support. It would be amazing to get thousands of comments opposing this particular proposal that's going to affect both the indigenous peoples of Guam and the CNMI. Also, just directly supporting organizations like Pertehi, Guahan in Guam, or ISA's organization, our Commonwealth 670 in Saipan. These are really concrete ways to support, and they're like low lifts in some ways. Just support these two organizations, period. And then two is help us make connections. We've been somewhat successful recently with organizations. There's three that I'll mention. Earth Justice, they've been really, really good as allies. Center for Biological Diversity, and both of those together have helped us sort of contest what's happening on our lands and in our seas with regard to ecological degradation, right? But also the Center for Constitutional Rights has recently also helped us. Blue Ocean Law, my firm, filed these basically human rights complaints against what the U.S. military is doing in a violation of our right to self-determination and our right to free, prior, and informed consent. So even like supporting those organizations and helping us reach others. A third and final example is there's another organization called the Pacific Radiation Area of Radiation Survivors, PARS. It's led by someone named Robert Celestial. This organization is also trying to have RECA amended for downwind compensation, and it's been a ridiculous struggle, but we don't have enough powerful, influential members in Congress to take up that cause. We need more. So to the extent that we could get some support with that, that's another concrete thing that we could use.
I know that we ask you such big questions and ask for such short pieces of the answers. And I know that we're going to have to close really soon, but I just want to share out the two questions that are in the chat and see if you want to drop a very quick response to them. There's Patrick's question, which is about in anti-militarism work, we often see intersections with environmental justice, legal advocacy, decolonization, defending democracy against authoritarianism. How can adopting an intersectional movement of movements framework that's built on solidarity and cooperation help us not only break down thematic boundaries, but overcome professional silos to strengthen organizing? And another big one. And again, if you have just any quick top of the head thoughts, this conversation doesn't have to get completed today. Paul's asking, how do we sound an alarm without being received as alarmists? And sorry, I was trying to go short, but as all have mentioned, we're at an inflection point. When I hear that, I understand that there really isn't anything to go back to, and I'm fine with that, but it begs for a very plain answer of what to do in these desperate times. Brittany and Julian, are you able to stay just a couple minutes over and just give us your very quick top line thoughts? And then before we close, we're just going to point people, David and Isa are going to point people to the website. But what do you think when you hear those questions?
I guess I can take it, Brittany, because you went, you were on the hot seat first. Basically, I love the questions because they sort of reveal a deeper understanding of a truth that we must face now more than ever before, that we have to become, and we actually are, more porous than we believe. We really, truly are. And that has to be true for our movements. I mean, and I see it so clearly and so sharply when I think of two movements that need to work together and hold hands in more in more concerted ways. And that is the anti-war movement on the one hand and the climate justice movement on the other hand. I have been in too many spaces where I see those two movements, being like relatively effective in their own ways, but they don't join up. They miss opportunities for cross-pollination and for important sort of mutually reinforcing work. I mean, that solidarity, especially between those two movements, is so clear to me. And also, like, I just want to, and can I I'll stay for 2 more minutes, 5 more minutes, but can I also add something completely ancillary to this discussion, but just by way of illustration? Is that okay, Claire? Okay, so I spent the last almost 6 years of my life almost singularly focused on one thing. That is representing Vanuatu before the International Court of Justice, seeking an advisory opinion on climate change. We were told the entire time, I mean, the whole 5.5 year journey by naysayers that we couldn't do it, we were unrealistic, we were too ambitious, and it wasn't achievable. That with the legal question we were seeking to have the world's highest court answer, i.e., that states have all of these climate-related obligations, and when they breach those obligations, it gives rise to legal consequences in the form of climate reparations. We were told that that is way too ambitious and absolutely impossible. So what we did was we did what all activists kind of like need to do, which is like take a really sobering, realistic assessment of power and realize exactly who are your clearest, most natural allies. For Vanuatu and for the Pacific, it's, for example, the Caribbean and all of Africa. It's basically every single climate vulnerable country and community for whom climate change is an existential threat and who needs a genuine and decisive interruption or radical departure from business as usual. That is climate vulnerable countries. So we ignored the inherited wisdom. We didn't court the global north countries. We instead focused on the Pacific, the Caribbean, Africa. And then we got a coalition once OACPS, a block of 79 states, came on board. We were so much closer to the majority we needed at the UN General Assembly, which is like 97 states, right? So, and that's when the momentum happened. And we did it by actually ignoring the conventional wisdom and actually realizing that that's what we always have to do. We have to, like, who has the most to benefit? Identifying the parties with the least amount of power and making common cause and understanding that we need to do this together. And that's why that was a success. And in short, the court not only delivered sort of everything we asked it for, but it did so unanimously, which is like the 5th time in its 80-year history that ever happened. And a small indigenous-led law firm, a small indigenous country, mostly indigenous country, Vanuatu in the Pacific, led that initiative. And so that's just a really concrete example of what we all need to do, and that's how I'll end maybe, is that we have to be almost like fiercely stubborn and have a fidelity to our vision, our political and sort of like this unmatched moral clarity. It has to all be bundled together, and that's sort of the ingredients that's necessary to see something through, including putting an end to the military-industrial complex. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love that. Um, I want to I'll speak to the second question first around alarmism. I think that we just have to be specific about the alarms that we're raising, right? Like these are the specific things that I see that tell me that this is on the horizon. And I found that when I do that and I kind of give the grounds of why I'm assessing that like an auto coup is a realistic red line we should be thinking about, that it comes across as less just me like shrieking into the void and more like, here's the 5 reasons. If you disagree that those reasons are pointing towards this, then let's have the conversation on those grounds, right? On the what we should do, I feel like this is going to be an unpopular answer, to be honest with you, because I am still grappling it with it myself. But my honest take when I zoom out and I put any liberalism that might have been conditioned into me aside, and I think, what do I think is really needed? I really think that and maybe this is military tactician conditioning. I don't know. I have some humility about that, but I think that as long as this empire can keep throwing fires at our feet and we keep trying to win on those issues, one fire at a time, we will never be able to position ourselves to win control. And we've locked ourselves into a never-ending tunnel of fighting the horrifying things that this empire will do regardless of who's controlling it. And our people will keep suffering and dying. And that's a really depressing prospect. And it's hard to say, but I honestly think what that means is that we have to, at some point, decide that in some meaningfully coordinated way, right? I'm not just saying like a handful of people going rogue and being like, I'm not caring about these issues anymore. And it's not caring about them, but I actually do think it might be necessary for us to sacrifice for a time fighting the specific fires that are killing our people and causing them to suffer in favor of trying to win the control that can turn the faucet of fire off. Sorry, I lost the analogy, but you get where I'm going with that, right? I That is a horrifying thing to say. And it's my honest thinking at this point that that might be what it takes. Like, I can't see myself fighting every fire that this empire throws at all of our people one at a time for the rest of my life. Even if we won all of them, we've changed the power dynamic in zero ways so much of the time, right? It's like we have these wins, but we still have no control over the system. And like, I think we have to figure out, how do we gear ourselves towards winning control over the system? And that's going to mean we can't fight on every front. And that's feels Machiavellian and devastating and, you know, problematic maybe. And maybe it is, I don't know, but that's honestly what comes to mind with that question, is like, I think we have to figure out what would it take for us to do that, and not do it in a way where we're abandoning our people, but where we're unifying our power in a way that is about winning control so that we can win the agenda and conditions that our people actually need, and stop having to have fires constantly getting flung at us endlessly for the rest of our lives and our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives.
It is so painful to have to cut off this conversation, but as Claire said, we will be continuing this conversation. My name is David Vine. I'm another member of the steering committee of the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex. I have put the website, our newly relaunched website URL, in the chat, as well as our email address where you can stay in touch. And I want to just quickly point to the website and make you aware of the website, which we've been working on for more than a year, to become a hub for resources, tools that people in movements like all of you are part of can use to improve your work and to better connect different people and organizations to improve the strength of our movements. As I show you the homepage of the newly relaunched website, for those, and we hope everyone says yes to this, who would like to continue this conversation in a discussion-based format, please put the word yes in the chat. You can either put yes in the chat to the entire chat, or you can private message me in the chat. Just put the word yes. If you registered, we have your email address. If you did not register, please include your email address so we can contact you. We will be organizing a follow-up conversation, again, a discussion-based format, and just want to very quickly point you to the website, which includes a whole set of resources organized by type, and as well as a list of allied organizations that so frequently we find that people in different organizations are doing similar work, but are unaware of other people in very similar organizations doing very similar work. The website is designed to connect people in organizations and movements and strengthen our movement to dismantle the military-industrial complex, overcome the war machine. And because we have run out of time, I'm going to turn things over to Isa Ariola.
Hi, everybody. We've reached the end, sadly, although we'd love to continue this conversation. As David just said, my name is Isa Ariola, and I'm also on the steering committee for the Dismantle the Military Industrial Complex network. I just want to close out now by really extending our deepest gratitude to these brilliant panelists. It's really rare that you can truly say that in one panel, and that's Brittany, Britt, Julian, and Bill. You all are obviously phenomenal. You're leading the way on so many fronts, and we just want to thank you for your courageous clarity, for highlighting both the lived realities of the communities that are on the front lines of the MIC, but also, highlighting the intersection of the policy structures that are enabling these endless wars. And of course, a very special thanks for continuing to alert us and to inspire us about the urgent need for justice, and genuine security, which is what we so very much need in this moment. So thank you, Zeus Maasi. We hope to be in contact with all of you in the future to really, build out this movement in a way that's needed for today, for our life. So we hope you have a wonderful day and night wherever you are. And thank you so much for joining us here today. We will see you soon. Adios.